Hello hunters, and welcome back to Super Fan Natural. In case you missed the title, this is actually the second half of a two-part series, but you don't really need to watch the first part to enjoy this one. Basically, there's a whole host of miscellaneous monstrosities skulking around the world of Supernatural, things that definitely aren't human or mundane animals, but who also don't seem to belong to any of the established larger categories of creature. They aren't demons, angels, ghosts, pagan gods, or primordials, and while it's possible that some of them are fairies or monster children of Eve, their origins, MO, or general vibes don't really fit. Sometimes these disparate species are grouped together under the umbrella category of creature, though it's important to remember that this doesn't mean that they're related, and also that's not really a classification used in the show. In these videos, I give you a brief overview of the various random creatures that appear in the series, listing them in alphabetical order from A to Z. In part 1, I covered A through H, I think. So, let's pick up from there. Also, as mentioned in part 1, I'm not covering anything that fits into any established category, including possible fairies or superpowered humans, nor am I going to discuss any creature that was mentioned but not actually shown. Our first subject is a bit of a weird one. It's one of the show's own homebrew beasties that shares a lot of similarities with a different creature that also appeared in Supernatural. Way back in the second episode of the series, the writers gave us their interpretation of a Wendigo, and for the most part, the show's version sticks close to the real myth. If a person lost in the wilderness commits an act of cannibalism, then they might just mutate into a gangly, gray monster plagued with an eternal hunger for man meat. Pretty cool, pretty simple, and a nice memorable episode. Thing is, apparently someone in the crew decided, why limit ourselves to one cursed cannibal creature? And in season 14, we're introduced to a Kahuna. Like Wendigo, Kahuna are born from humans who give in to cannibalistic hunger, and as punishment, they're transformed into a walking nightmare cursed with an unquenchable appetite for human flesh. So yeah, pretty similar beasts. But there are a number of things that help Kahuna stand out from their inspiration. For starters, Kahuna aren't actually created from the act of man-munching itself. Instead, their curse is the result of shamanic magic wielded by an unspecified Native American tribe originally located somewhere in Iowa. Yeah, the only Kahuna we saw was intentionally transformed by a shaman as punishment for cannibalism, mutating the simple crazed white man into a horrifying green mess of flesh and flora. So, I get what they're going for here, but honestly, this punishment seems a bit reckless considering just how dangerous the Kahuna is. Not only is it super strong and fast, it's also immortal and immune to most mundane weapons. Basically, this curse is similar to the Hamdai from The Mummy, a powerful supernatural punishment that ends up creating an incredibly dangerous monster for some fucking reason. Now, to be fair, there is a bit more to this curse than just looking like Swamp Thing. The Kahuna's hunger is so insane that their own body is constantly feeding on itself, and the one that we saw was bound to a particular stretch of Iowa wilderness. So it's not like they just got some sick superpowers and were left to wander the world. Speaking of sick, the Kahuna's rumbly-tumbly is so violently upset that they can actually weaponize their own nausea by vomiting out acidic bile. So in conclusion, these things are dangerous, disgusting, and a bit derivative. Best just gank them via silver blade to the heart. Kahuna isn't the only hideous homebrew monstrosity that the show cooked up. No, someone working on season 14 must have really wanted more practical, fully inhuman creatures in the show. And they also probably watched David Cronenberg's The Fly, because not only did we get a gooey freak with acidic vomit, we were also treated to a human-insect combo known as a Muska. Muska are creatures with a humanoid frame, but whose heads, and probably other body parts, look like those of a giant mutant fly. Yeah, there's a whole species of these things running around the world of Supernatural. And what's even crazier is that Muska don't have any kind of shapeshifting or camouflage power that lets them look like humans. We don't get much information about them, but apparently, despite their horrifying appearance, Muska are actually fairly passive beings. They mostly keep to themselves away from human society, and as far as we know, they don't usually eat people, so cases of them attacking folks are pretty rare. However, every so often, a Muska dude will fail to find a mate, which can lead to some nasty behavior. Driven insane by loneliness, the insectoid incel will venture off into the human world and abduct people in order to... Actually, you know what? Take a guess. What do you think these lonely, loony fly folks do with their victims? If you said pile up their bodies in order to form a nest of warmth and compassion, then congrats, you're right. Yeah, these bad egg bug boys try to satisfy their loneliness by creating flesh nests made of dead or unconscious humans glued together with sticky mucus. Gross. And, might I add, sad. Thankfully, despite how rarely hunters encounter Muska, hunting them isn't exactly difficult. They tend to nab multiple people from the same spot not far from their nest. Their only means of disguise is a very conspicuous costume, and when it comes to fighting them, they don't seem too dangerous. Besides their glue goo, Muska might be a little more physically powerful than humans, but all it takes to squash them is a regular bullet to the dome. This less than impressive display might be why Muska stay away from people. They don't have the kind of power seen from other monsters. Then again, it could just be that they're intelligent, compassionate creatures. They're smart enough to fabricate clothes, and when one of their bad eggs gets got, a funeral procession will be sent to retrieve their body. Sweet. Up next, we've got a mystical little critter, which we know very little about. It's called a Merid, and while it may look like nothing more than a punk-ass goblin, it apparently has the power to make you rich and successful. This mysterious monstrosity wields some kind of vague mystical ability to gift people unnatural health and wealth in exchange for a steady supply of fresh human blood. We only caught a glimpse of this arrangement, which took the form of a corrupt hunter keeping a Merid prisoner in his basement. For over a decade, this dickhead would capture and feed innocent folks to his little pet, and for his trouble, the guy was granted vague riches that allowed him to buy his own bar. It's never explained how Lee found out about the Merid's powers, nor how they work exactly. We also don't really know how intelligent they are, where they come from, how many there are, or really anything beyond the fact that they can give you cool stuff. Personally, I kind of wonder if the Merid is related to the pagan god Moloch, since we saw that the old Canaanite deity struck up an almost identical deal earlier in the series. Whatever the case, beheading a Merid is enough to put it down, and genuinely, that's all we know about this ghoulish gray-skinned gift giver. Moving on, we've got another creature whose shtick revolves around hearts and desires. However, instead of granting wishes, a Karine will use your desires against you in order to rip out your heart. Karine are magical shapeshifters who, and say it with me now, we don't know much about. At least, not in their natural state. See, the only Karine we ever saw was under the control of a witch. So, of the little information we did get about Karine, it's hard to tell how much was the result of the witch's magic. What we do know for sure is that Karine have potent shapeshifting abilities that allow them to quickly turn into pretty much anyone, including people they've never actually met before. As with the skin-peely variety of shapeshifter, the only hint that a person might be a Karine in disguise is their eyes giving off an inhuman glow in pictures and videos. Well, also, if the person they're mimicking is already dead, then that should probably clue you in that something weird is going on. Unlike those other shapeshifters, Karine aren't vulnerable to silver. Instead, their only weak point is their blackened heart, which has to be destroyed in order to gank these creatures. Note that I said destroyed and not cut out. That's because it seems like Karine can survive without their hearts actually in their chests. At least the one enslaved by the mystical hairdresser could. But again, that could be a result of witchy bullshit. Karine can also read people's minds and hearts in order to determine the person that their target desires the most, even if the target themselves doesn't know the answer. After enslaving a Karine by capturing its heart, the witch Sonia bound the creature to a curse which forced it to hunt down a chain of targets, impersonate their crush, then after getting close enough, it would use its superhuman strength to literally rip its victims' hearts out. The curse, and thus the creature's deadly target lock, could be passed on through smooches, though that part at least seems to come entirely from the spell rather than being something Karine do normally. It's also a blatant and watered-down ripoff of the creature and curse from It Follows, and if you want more information about that, I made a whole video breaking it down. Once a Karine's heart gets sufficiently damaged, the creature will conveniently poof into nothing. Oh yeah, and we don't get to see what they really look like. Womp womp. The same season that gave us the Karine also gave us our next entry, the simply yet spookily named Eater of Souls, the Soul Eater. Yeah, not the most creative moniker, but if nothing else, it's at least straightforward. Soul Eaters are a rare type of extra-dimensional thing that sustain themselves on the immortal essence of humans. I cover another species of soul-sucking fiend in part 1 of this duology, the Crocata, and while this brand of Soul Eater shares the crank caller's diet, they don't seem to be directly related. Crocata are physical creatures, snaggletooth people impersonators who quite literally suck their victim's soul out of their mouths, while soul eaters are more ghostly beings, gray-skinned and clad in hooded cloaks, and who take a slightly different approach to feeding. See, soul eaters don't actually live in the same kind of dimensional space as their prey. Instead, they inhabit their own little pocket realms known as nests, which overlap with the material plane, but don't necessarily abide by the same laws of physics. The creature will hide patiently within its nests, waiting for sweet, besouled meat to come close enough to the invisible point of overlap, and once a succulent soul wanders into its midst, the eater will reach through the dimensional divide, grab hold of the target's spirit, and yoink it back into the nest dimension. This separates the victim's soul from their body, but luckily it isn't instant death. Instead, it acts more like involuntary astral projection. The pair are still linked, just, away from one another. However, this does cause the body to fall into a kind of coma, where it slowly wastes away. Meanwhile, the vic's soul is trapped within the nest, which fortunately isn't like a spider web or wasp nest or anything like that. Instead, it's a dingy, boring reflection of the physical plane, which the victim just kind of has to wander around as the soul eater slowly and seemingly passively drains their energy over the course of God only knows how long. When I say that, I genuinely mean that God might be the only one who really knows how long these poor saps stay trapped in the nest, and that's because of the realm's weird relationship to time. Because nests exist outside of normal space-time, their internal timelines are all sorts of wonky and crisscross all over themselves. The best illustration of this was when Dean and Bobby each got pulled into the same nest during different hunts 5 years apart, yet the two are able to see each other within the nest because, in there, the events were happening at the same time. Look, I'm not going to go too far into this, just think of it as weird Doctor Who time nonsense. Although, actually, this plot was quite obviously inspired by the movie Sinister, but I've already made a video explaining that. It's the same one I just mentioned in the last section. Soul Eaters look solid in their nests. However, because they live within a less than physical dimension, they themselves are also less than completely tangible on the mortal plane. They do have some ability to physically interact with the material world, but if they need to do any major work, then they'll jump inside their uninhabited body of one of their victims. The only known way to destroy these things is with a spell that involves drawing a specific rune inside and outside of its nest. If done correctly, then the eater will poof away, its nest will collapse, and all the souls will be released. If any of them are still alive, they'll autopilot back to their bodies and finally wake up, and I assume any who don't have living vessels will be reaped into the afterlife. I mean, I hope that's what happened. Would be kind of messed up if it's not. Next up, we've got one of the most interesting creatures in the show, one that could potentially have massive implications for the entire reality of Supernatural. Have you ever wanted something to be real so badly that you try to just will it into existence? Well, within the show, that's kind of possible. With enough focus, will, and intent, it's possible for even mere mortals to bring complex beings into reality. And when this happens, the creation is known as a tulpa. Yes, tulpas are literally ideas made manifest, concepts brought into reality through sheer mental power. And while you might think that the scope of this would be super limited, the one and only tulpa we saw within the series was actually pretty complex. It took the forms of several different ghostly entities based off of an urban legend surrounding its stomping ground. And while it's not super clear if this thing was sentient, it definitely wasn't just an illusion, since the thing was fully capable of axe murdering suckers. So that's pretty freaking insane, right? I mean, essentially, punk-ass humans have the same creative power as God himself, able to just think things into being on a whim. Well, as you might expect, it's a bit more complicated than that. It is allegedly possible for strong-willed and disciplined individuals to warp reality through imagination, but the soul tulpa that we saw had some help stepping into reality. See, there's a special Tibetan symbol that concentrates thoughts in order to make materializing one's ideas much, much easier. It's still not enough for one overactive mind to manifest a tulpa, but if a whole bunch of people stare at the glyph and focus on the same thing, well, it can become real. And that's exactly what happened. A pair of dumbass teens accidentally included this magical mark in their fake haunted house setup, and once a photo of the haunt went online, people began reading the story while unknowingly loaning their thought energy to the symbol, and as a result, the fake ghost and its story literally took on a life of its own as a tulpa. Apparently, tulpas are bound by the lore that they're given, meaning that if someone wanted to intentionally create one, they could theoretically write in a weakness or kill switch in order to prevent things from getting out of hand. Thing is, it's also possible to edit a tulpa's lore in real time, causing its appearance and properties to change on the fly. This is what happened in the show. Because this killer ghost tulpa was brought to life via a story on a forum, it changed as new users updated the creepypasta with their own takes on the legend. Ultimately, we're never given one specific way to deal with tulpas as a whole. You just gotta play by the rules of their lore, or derail it altogether, as seen when the Winchesters burned down the house that the fake ghost tulpa was supposed to haunt. Now, at the beginning of this section, I said that the existence of tulpas could have huge implications for Supernatural, and I wasn't joking. We only ever saw one tulpa, or do we? At the end of the episode, Sam wonders how many supernatural creatures exist just because people believe they exist, essentially suggesting that some of them could be tulpas. And I have to wonder, could God be a tulpa? The supposed creator of everything, actually a creation himself? There's not really any textual evidence for that, but hey, who knows? Even if you don't believe that, I still wish they'd revisited this concept late in the series. There's so much potential there. Moving on, we've got another creature that I've mentioned in another video, but never really talked about in depth. It's also another one with a really fun name, Roshasa. Within Supernatural, Roshasa are yet another breed of shape-shifting people eater who look human most of the time, but use disguise and deception in order to get close in for their kill. However, when compared to other form changers in the show, this one's MO is a bit more convoluted. See, Roshasa hunger for the flesh of adults, but not just any adults. No, these morphin monsters hunger for the meat of homeowners. It sounds ridiculous, but it genuinely seems like an important part of these monsters' lore is that they penetrate the safety of one's home and devour them when they're at their most vulnerable. Maybe it's part of their nature, maybe it's just a psycho kink, or maybe they're just jealous of nice human homes, considering that these creatures specifically live in filth and squalor. If a Roshasa sniffs out a nice juicy housed meal, they can't just burst in and scarf him down. Unfortunately, these flesh eaters are bound by the old school vampire restriction of not being able to enter a home unless invited in, something that doesn't actually affect vampires in this universe. Fortunately for the Roshasa, they're shapeshifters, so they can just put on a friendly disguise and schmooze themselves a dinner invite. We don't really get a good look into the range of their transformative abilities. The one that we saw in the show could turn into a clown. Well, he didn't actually turn into a clown so much as turn into a different guy who then dressed up as a clown. Point is, he impersonated a clown in order to entice children into letting him into their houses so he could feed on their parents. Speaking of that, I just gotta rant for a second because I've never understood this trope of kids being so enamored with clowns that they put themselves into these weird situations. Like, I'm not scared of clowns. I've never been scared of clowns. When I was a kid, I thought clowns were fun. That being said, I've never once in my life, not even as a dumbass kid, thought that if I saw a random clown outside my house or in a sewer or anywhere besides where you'd expect to see a clown, that would be cool or normal or an invitation for fun. Like, it'd be different if it was like Santa or, I don't know, a leprechaun or something actually magical, but I can't remember a time in my life where I wasn't super aware that clowns are just people in costumes. I don't know, maybe I've just always been a little chicken shit, but this trope just never makes sense to me. Anyway, back to the monster. So, we don't know the full scope of Roshasa shapeshifting prowess, but we do know of one thing that they can turn into: an invisible person. Yeah, Roshasa have the power to make themselves invisible to the naked eye, which is actually a kind of rare ability for physical monsters. They seem to mostly use this for self-defense, but personally, if I was a Roshasa, I'd be using this power all the time, way more useful than turning into a clown. This is another case where we don't really know if these things have a full, separate true form. Our one example did flash some inhuman baby blue peepers and a weird twisty face, but since they're shapeshifters, it's hard to tell exactly what that was. As with many beasts, Roshasa are vulnerable to pokes from a specific material, in their case, brass. Up next, we've got the creature on this list, which we know the least about. In Season 1, we saw the Winchesters take out a mangy humanoid freak known as a Rawhead. This hunt just serves as the opening for an episode, so we get next to no information about the beast. The one we saw looked like a sickly, shaggy hobo with sharp teeth and claws, and apparently it had a taste for children. It was inhumanly strong, fast, and tough, with the only known weakness being electricity. In the modern day, that's no problem. We've got plenty of ways to shock something. But I do wonder how hunters in ye olden times dealt with these things. Probably chopping off their heads. Not many species can survive that. Though some can, so who knows. And, yeah, that's really all we get about these things. Alright, let's see what's next. Yes, it's...
the whore.
No, Cass isn't being misogynistic. There's literally a creature called the Whore. More specifically, the Whore of Babylon. This biblical bitch was some sort of unique dark being who served Lucifer in hell. Though, like Hell's Hounds, it doesn't seem like she was a demon herself. During the apocalypse, the unholy Ho would seek out communities of good, kind people, kill and replace one of their most trusted members, and play the role of a prophet to whom heaven was giving direct divine guidance. This grift here was actually pretty insidious. By secretly coordinating with demons under her control, the false prophet could pretty convincingly sell the idea that she was getting visions and instructions that helped the community fight back against the forces of hell. However, while things start off well enough, the thought's visions eventually revealed that the angels aren't happy with the lack of faith and righteousness amongst the flock. This leads to people turning on each other as they try to root out supposed unfaithfulness, which inevitably leads to innocent bloodshed. The ultimate goal of this charade is to corrupt and damn as many good souls as possible. And honestly, if you don't have access to an actual angel who knows all of the legit prophets, then it could be pretty hard to dismantle this kind of racket, especially during the literal apocalypse where there are real demons flying around. In addition to her impressive kayfabe skills, the Whore is telekinetic, telepathic, a shapeshifter, and invulnerable to pretty much anything besides a cypress stake wielded by a righteous servant of heaven. Honestly, based on all of that, I kind of wonder if she could possibly be a pagan deity. I mean, special wooden stakes are the go-to weapon for taking out false gods, and she even does this twitchy face thing that we saw a few other pagans do. Also, as a Stargate fan, I'm obligated to point out that Michael Shanks is in this episode, the one that features the Whore of Babylon. Wait a minute. Michael Shanks? False gods? Fake memories? Babylon? Oh, God.
English. It's much more modern.
What fate, Amaroka?
I don't know.
So that last entry was pretty dark, yeah? Let's give ourselves a nice palate cleanse by covering a creature that, under the right circumstances, can be the complete opposite of an evil, manipulative whore. What comes to mind when you think of a wood nymph? Probably a sexy, scantily clad lady frolicking through an enchanted forest. Well, maybe there are nymphs like that in Supernatural, but the only one that we actually saw was a bit different. Instead of being a sultry maiden, the nymph known as Mrs. Butters acted more like a magical grandma. Miss B may not look like much, but this little lady came equipped with some serious mystical juice, which she could use for things like telekinesis, magical healing, teleportation, and conjuring objects out of thin air. If that's not interesting enough, then how about this? Butters could not only single-handedly power the entire Men of Letters bunker, she could also amplify its capabilities well beyond their normal capacity and essentially turn the base into a legit monster hunting command center. Now, technically, we don't know if that kind of juice is typical for wood nymphs, or if Mrs. Butters was just uniquely strong or skilled, but either way, her powers seem like they could put her in, or at least near, the same league as fairies or low-level angels, which is pretty impressive. And the best part? If you get on her good side and endear yourself to her, Butters will not only lend you her power and knowledge, she'll go as far as to serve and pamper you like kind of like a fairy godmother. It's pretty sweet, not gonna lie. Especially since it doesn't seem like wood nymphs need to feed on humans or do other messed up nonsense in order to sustain themselves. So then, what's the catch? There's always gotta be a catch. Well, you see, the reason why wood nymphs are willing to lend their aid to mortals is because they seem to form very strong bonds with those that they care about. Like, really strong. Like, to a degree that could be dangerous. As you might expect, if something were to threaten those in the care of a wood nymph, the creature will react less than kindly. When the Men of Letters found Mrs. Butters, she'd been kidnapped by the Thule Society, and during the nymph napping, she apparently slaughtered over 200 of the bastards. So just don't get in their way, right? Well, unfortunately, sometimes even those in the good graces of a nymph can find themselves on the wrong end of some tough love. For example, Mrs. Butters was so thoroughly on the side of the men of letters and their mission to protect humanity from monsters that when she came face to face with a Nephilim, even though he was friendly, she felt that he had to be iced. What's even worse, when Sam and Dean tried to stop her, she resorted to torture, which she justified as being what's best for them. Now, admittedly, this particular nymph had been essentially brainwashed by a psychopath, so it's possible that her kind aren't usually quite this deranged. But then again, she did kill over 200 Thule before Cuthbert got to her. So if you find yourself on the wrong side of a wood nymph's wrath, what do you do? Yeah, unfortunately, wood nymphs are among the few creatures for whom the show didn't really give a solid slaying method. Though it's not necessarily because they're too powerful, it's more so because they're really rare, and so there's just not much research about them. I'm very certain that they can be destroyed via super weapons like the Colt or Death's Scythe, but besides that, good luck. So all in all, wood nymphs are powerful, mysterious, loving, and very, very dangerous. Also, if you think that Mrs. Butters is a stupid name, that's just a moniker she took up for the sake of her adopted humans. Apparently, true wood nymph names can't really be spoken by humans. Well, that was a nice little break from the doom and gloom of the rest of this video. Now, let's move on to Lovecraftian horrors beyond the scope of mortal man. In the vast multiverse of Supernatural, there's a dimension, or universe, or accursed corner of space occupied by a pair of alien tentacle monsters known as Yokoth and Glether. At one point, these two are referred to as gods, but it's hard to tell if that's their actual designation, or if humans just saw their scope and power and believed them to be deities. Whatever they are, these freaks are pretty scary. We only catch a glimpse of their true forms, which appear as masses of tentacles reaching through an interdimensional rift, with the implication being that their full body is much larger and freakier than pretty much anything else in the series. Instead of fully crossing over into the main universe, Yokoth downloaded her consciousness into a human vessel, though she could still sprout tentacles from her mouth. According to Yokoth, aka the Star of Madness and Mother of Faceless Hordes, the gruesome twosome are cosmic overeaters, and they've apparently consumed most of the life within their own universe. We don't know if that means that they travel world to world, devouring anything in their path, or if they just suck down whole planets, but either option is pretty terrible. Still, everything in Supernatural has a weakness, right? So how do we exterminate these extraterrestrial tentacle terrors? Once again, we don't know. Yeah, like wood nymphs, Yokoth and Glether are among the few creatures for whom we're never given a way to destroy. If they go long enough without feeding, then they'll be weakened a bit, but there's still no known way to kill them. Yokoth was neutralized by sending her back to her home realm, but even that's not particularly easy, since the spell requires the Seal of Solomon and grace from an archangel. Side note, it's always kind of bugged me that the show just kind of glanced over the fact that this random Men of Letters chapter house just had archangel grace. Like, where'd you get that? Stuff's pretty freaking rare. Whatever, point is, Yokoth and Glether are two of the freakiest beasts in the show, and kind of its only real foray into cosmic horror, which is a shame. I really wish there was more of that. Alright, so if we learned anything from this video, it's that the world of Supernatural is filled with deadly creatures, almost all of whom have some sort of horrible violent side to them. Terror and negativity abound. So let's wrap up this series by covering one of the exceedingly rare races that's pretty much entirely good. Zana. Don't worry, Lyoko is safe. The Zana I'm talking about are more commonly known as imaginary friends, though they're not actually imaginary. Zana are a race of magical guides who appear to needy children and offer support and friendship in the hopes of improving the poor kid's situation even just a little bit. Unlike many supernatural species, Zana actually vary quite a bit in their appearance. Some look like regular humans, while others have more mythical traits like a mermaid tail or a unicorn horn. There's nothing to suggest that Zana can shapeshift or change their appearance through magical means. However, they do come equipped with a much better form of camouflage. Zana are naturally imperceptible to humans. One could be dancing right in front of you, screaming a sea shanty at the top of their lungs, and you wouldn't notice unless they wanted you to. That last part is actually pretty important. Zana have the ability to selectively grant humans Zana vision. And when I say selectively, I mean that they can not only make themselves visible to only specific people, They can also choose how much of the Zana world those folks get to perceive. For example, one Zana initially made himself visible to only Sam, then he let Dean see him, then later he had to give both boys a second eye opening in order to let them perceive other Zana. This is why these things are likened to imaginary friends. Their charges will be able to see and hear them, but the parents won't. Now, I know what you're thinking. Invisible creatures who seek out kids? Bad. Very bad. Wee-woo, call the police. However, I wasn't lying when I said that Zana are among the very few genuinely good species in the show. We have absolutely no evidence of ulterior motives for their actions. They just really want to help kids, and they do so in a very mundane way. Zana may be magical, but they don't bespell their charges or anything like that. Instead, they just chill with them, playing games, talking, offering advice, and just generally being a friend so that the kid doesn't feel so alone. We know neither the method nor criteria for choosing a child. However, we do know that Zana aren't solitary creatures who wander the world in search of sad kids. No, Zana are actually quite organized. Like angels, their operation is structured like a company or bureau or agency, with some Zana acting as field agents and others doing administrative work at some unseen home office. We don't get many details about the intricacies or scope of Zana operations, but the wording of their one episode made it seem fairly impressive, at least by creature standards. We do learn that Zana can call out to each other telepathically, and this is how field agents keep in touch with headquarters. In addition to their invisibility and telepathy powers that are common to the entire species, some Zana come equipped with unique abilities, such as the power to produce actual music while playing air guitar. All in all, Zana seem like one of the last creatures you'd ever have a reason to gank. However, if the need arises, they can be slain. Witchcraft can be used to give humans the ability to see Zana, and there's at least one magical dagger capable of fatally shivving the so-called friends. Most Zana seem to bleed regular red blood, but there are a select few who are filled with glitter and sparkles. So if you get lucky, your active amicicide could end up being kinda pretty.
Well, Hunters, I think that pretty much covers every single random creature that appears in the show. I probably missed something, and if so, let me know in the comments. I'll have more content for you soon, but for now, carry on.